DA has applied to join the application by the IEC at the Constitutional Court for the postponement of the October local government elections. The party argues that a postponement would be in violation of the constitutional requirement that elections be held at least 3 months after the expiry of the 5-year term of office. Regarding concerns about holding an election during a pandemic, the DA says it's entirely possible, as demonstrated in over 120 countries that have already done so. The DS Federal Council Chair is Helen Zille. She joins us now via our video link to get us a sense of what else we need to know about the party's position. Helen, great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time for us here on the AM report. I wonder if I can begin by taking liberties just to get your take on the President's first appearance, if you like, at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry yesterday, and hone in specifically on the issues of governance that have been ventilated there. So much being said about the ANC's cadre deployment system and committee and whether or not that actually works. The thrust of what the President was trying to convince us is that the committee makes all but recommendations, and it's still up to government to actually take or reject those recommendations. Does that hold water insofar as you're concerned?
Well, firstly, John Steenhuisen, our leader, should be commenting on this, but I will do so briefly. First of all, from that evidence, it was clear that President Ramaphosa has no idea what state capture means. State capture is not about an outside business interest like the Guptas capturing state institutions. It's about the ANC doing so. These institutions should be independent of the political party. That's why every democracy in the world is based on a separation between the party and the state. The ANC as a party wants to control the state, wants to capture all the independent institutions from the South African Revenue Service right through to the prosecuting authority, all of the state-owned entities and everything. The party wanted to control. And once the party had succeeded in controlling those, and Cyril Ramaphosa seems to see no problem with that, that's where the core problem is. Once Jacob Zuma controlled all of those, all the Guptas had to do was to capture Jacob Zuma, and they controlled the state. The problem of state capture is when the political party tries to control state institutions that should be independent. And what emerged from that was that the President doesn't understand what state capture actually means, and probably most of the media don't either. That's the first point. The second point is that state capture went so far that the ANC's deployment committee was even discussing who should be appointed as judges. Now, I think even the most basic understanding of how the state should work, if people have that, they would understand that judges have to be totally independent from the ruling party. So for the ANC's deployment committee to be discussing who should be deployed as judges shows you how deep the rot of state capture actually was. Now, there is no such thing as the ANC's deployment committee recommending people and then the state deciding somebody different. Because they all know ultimately that they depend on the ANC's deployment committee and they won't go against it. This is the heart of state capture. Cadre deployment is state capture. And until cadre deployment is declared unconstitutional, and until that committee is disbanded, we will have state capture in South Africa.
Many people say there's a lot to be said about a party contesting power being able to influence who, I guess, is able to drive home their ideology. There's a couple of things that the President has also said about ways perhaps through which even this deployment committee can work better. I wonder if we can just take you back to that moment very quickly, and I'll get your thoughts, Helen, before we speak about the elections, if you don't mind. Take a listen.
The real safety for the process is that the deployment committee is not the appointing entity. You may well say influence. Yes, political party will always seek to influence. Precisely what you were also saying, that maybe if you want to influence, do it transparently. And I would buy into that. Do it openly and say, we support this one and that one. And in the end, even the public does get involved sometimes. when there's nominations for judges or top positions, they will say this one is preferable, and when that person has not been appointed, there's an outcry that they left out this one and so on. So influence, yes, but appointment, no. Because in the end, the ANC Deployment Committee is not the appointing structure.
Influence, yes, but appointment, no. Part of what Ramaphosa is also saying there, Helen, is that a political party will always look to try and influence, in my mind, or else why even contest an election? How do you see it?
Well, you contest the election because you're putting to the public a set of policies. A set of policies. The Constitution has to remain sacrosanct, and the Constitution, for example, says the judiciary must be independent, says the civil service must be staffed with people of real capacity who are able to do the job. I'm not quoting it directly, but that's basically what the Constitution says. And a political party stands for election and puts a manifesto to the public, and the public either supports it or votes for another party with a better manifesto. Then the public service in a democracy should implement the manifesto that was successful and that was supported by the voters. That's what happens in a democracy. The public service needs to be completely professional, completely independent, and implement the manifesto that was voted for by the public in an election. There is no way that institutions of state that are there to protect the public. The judiciary is not there to protect the ANC. The judiciary is there to protect you and me and everybody else in South Africa to get a fair trial, even if there are bogus charges, or especially when there are bogus charges against people. That is when they need an independent judiciary. That is why in our first interim constitution, the Public Service Commission was comprised of the very best leading brains in South Africa, and they went and appointed the leading civil servants, not the ruling party. That was changed in the final constitution. The biggest problem with South Africa is that the ANC controls the state, and the state is trying to control society. That is a recipe for dictatorship. What we need is a professional, independent public service, appointed on merit, irrespective of their political party, who will professionally implement the manifesto of the party that was elected, irrespective of their own political views. That is how a democracy works.
Speaking of which, then, let's get your thoughts around the most imminent election, which is these local government polls. The DA is obviously pushing for these to go ahead, but I wonder whether you reckon there's still enough time to even organize for an election at that scale by October, given how much time we have left.
Yes, Ayanda, there is enough time, even according to the to the IEC's own time frame. The IEC had a particular time frame, and it was a Freudian slip to nearly say the ANC there, because the deployed cadres in the IEC, I'm afraid, are stalling to put the court in an impossible position and to force the court's hand by saying there's no more time. As we sit here today, there is enough time in terms of the IEC's own time frame.
Right.
They have said that they can still hold a registration weekend, which is absolutely essential, but the ANC doesn't want an election in October, and that's what this is all about. It's got nothing to do with not being able to hold an election. The ANC does not want an election, and this illustrates the danger of cadre deployment. Illustrates it perfectly.
Just for our viewers who are wondering, Helen, did the DA back the decision to actually have the Mosineke inquiry instituted to look into the feasibility of an election?
I can't remember exactly who put out a statement at that particular point, but from the beginning we knew this was a turkey shoot. We knew that there was a foregone conclusion that the ANC and the EFF were trying to postpone the election, and we knew that they couldn't do it the proper way, which was to go to Parliament and get an amendment or a suspension of the constitutional clause that requires an election to be held by the end of October. So what do? They went another route. We knew that that was going to happen from the start.
So to be clear, the DA didn't even back the Moseneke inquiry being instituted to begin with?
We wanted the election to be held on the appropriate date from the start.
Sure, but the institution of this inquiry is my question. Was the DA in support of Moseneke looking into the feasibility of an election being held this year?
I will go back and look through all the statements, but I don't remember it being a big deal, and I certainly don't remember who issued a statement on it and what it said.
All right. This is why I'm asking that question. Is there a point in going ahead to hold an election this year in a context where we know the IEC is unlikely to declare it free and fair, given the fact that the IEC itself has decided to adopt the findings of this inquiry?
The IEC's one and only job is to make sure that elections are free, fair and safe in South Africa. That's its only job. This pandemic didn't jump out of nowhere. They've had 18 months knowing that an election was scheduled and knowing that an election was coming to prepare for an election. They haven't done so. Now they're in a bind and they are desperate to get out of their responsibilities. Every month we ask old people, we ask vulnerable people to stand in very long SASSA queues. Kids are at school. The malls are full. People are in restaurants. But somehow we can't hold an election. What is that all about? The election is a fundamental pillar of our democracy. It's not a braaivleis that you cancel because some of your friends are sick and can't come or because it's going to rain. An election is the only event in this country that is protected by the Constitution in terms of its timing. And yet with only one job to do, the IEC hasn't got round to doing what it takes to hold a free, fair and safe election by the deadline. How is that?
Tell you what, I think many will agree with you that we are in an unprecedented conundrum. But if, through your own admission, the IEC is in a bind, on what basis do we expect them to even go ahead and hold an election this year that can legitimately be declared free and fair?
Ayanda, every time the IEC is in a bind, we will cancel an election. I mean, listen to this. The ANC deploys its cadres to the IEC. The ANC decides it's not convenient for it to have an election now. Maybe it's looking at the polls and maybe the ANC's fallen below 50%. Maybe they're worried they're going to lose power. There could be 100 reasons why the ANC as the ruling party doesn't want to hold an election. So this is precisely where an independent state should come in. The IEC must say, no, sorry, we're responsible to the Constitution, not the ANC. The IEC must say, we have to hold an election because our accountability is not to any ruling party. Our accountability is to the Constitution. So sorry, ANC, maybe an election does not suit you, but we are not deployed cadres. Of course they are. But they should be saying we're not deployed cadres and we will hold an election by the constitutional date. That is the problem of state capture. You see it right here in the example of the IEC doing the ANC's bidding and not doing its job according to the Constitution.
Got you. And perhaps what you're saying will stick in many respects, but to deal with the immediate issue, many might say the horse has already bolted. Pointing out how the IEC is compromised now still doesn't answer the question around how South Africa can still have a free and fair election come October. Is perhaps the situation that we need to concede here, the fact that we really aren't quite sure about the best way to proceed without emerging with a greater crisis down the line?
No, the greater crisis is that the ruling party can decide when it wants to hold elections by using mechanisms other than going through Parliament and the proper amendment of the Constitution through the mechanisms provided by the Constitution. You can't have a bigger crisis than that. And as I have said, Ayanda, there is still time in terms of the IEC's own timetable to hold an election, including a registration weekend, which is essential to a free and fair election. Otherwise, 9 million people approximately will be disenfranchised. So they have to hold a registration weekend. But according to their own timeline, they can do that. on the last weekend of August or the first weekend of September. It is absolutely no argument to say we left it too late, we are very sorry, we didn't get our job done, now we have to violate the Constitution without going through the proper channels to do so. That is no reason. In fact, it causes a constitutional crisis. The IEC had plenty of time to get this together, and the evidence before the Moseneke Commission, if you go and look at it, and the evidence that is now coming into play is that we will be in a trough. We will be at a very low point of the virus in October. And that seems to be the best time with this mutating virus before another mutation hits and we possibly go into another peak beginning of next year. It might well be more dangerous to hold an election next year.
Yeah.
This is an excuse to get out of holding an election, and the DA is not buying it.
All right. Of course, the concern was that electioneering needs to take place ahead of an election. So even if there's a trough in October, the concern is that the electioneering in the moments leading up to that could lead to super spreader events. That's all the time we have, though, Helen. Thanks very much indeed for your indulgence. Really do appreciate it. I see there's something else you want to say. A final bite?
Yes. You don't have to hold big rallies to electioneer. There are many, many ways that you can get your message across to the voters, and holding huge rallies is not one of them. All over the world, elections have been held freely, fairly, and safely without big rallies. It's only the big rallies that cause a risk in terms of COVID.
Helen Zille, always a pleasure. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Helen Zille is the chair of the DA's Federal Council. Once again, thanks very much indeed.